The stars looked different through the cracked view screen. Lieutenant Yuna watched them spin as her ship tumbled through the atmosphere of the unknown planet. Red lights flashed everywhere. Alarms screamed in her ears. She pulled hard on the controls, but nothing responded. The ship was dying, and she might die with it. Her mission had been simple. Fly close to the Drask territory. Take pictures. Return home. But the Drask had found her ship. Their weapons tore through her shields like paper. Now she was falling toward their world, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The ground rushed up to meet her. Yuna closed her eyes and held tight to her seat. The impact threw her forward against her restraints. Metal screamed and twisted. Glass shattered. Then everything went dark. When Yuna opened her eyes again, smoke filled the cabin. Her head throbbed with pain. Blood dripped down her forehead. She touched her side and winced. Something was broken inside. Every breath hurt. She needed to move. The Drask would come soon. Yuna unbuckled her restraints with shaking hands. She fell to the floor and cried out. The pain was terrible, but she forced herself to crawl. The emergency kit was somewhere in the wreckage. She found it near the back wall, crushed but still sealed. Inside were bandages, medicine, and a small transmitter. She pressed the transmitter button 3 times. A distress signal. Maybe someone would hear it. Maybe they would come. But the Drask came first. Heavy footsteps crunched through the debris outside. Yuna tried to hide, but her body would not cooperate. The ship's door tore open with a shriek of metal. Bright light flooded in. Tall shadows blocked the sun. Yuna looked up at the creatures standing over her. The Drask were as tall as bears and covered in dark scales. Their eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. Sharp teeth filled their mouths. They wore armor that looked like it was made from black stone. One of them pointed a weapon at her head. Another spoke in a language that sounded like rocks grinding together. They grabbed Yuna roughly. She tried to fight, but her broken body had no strength left. They dragged her out of the wreckage and into the light. The planet's sun was orange, not yellow like Earth's. The sky was purple. The air smelled wrong, like metal and sulfur. A vehicle waited nearby. It looked like a tank with legs instead of wheels. The Drask threw Yuna into the back. The door slammed shut, trapping her in darkness. The vehicle began to move. Each bump and turn sent new waves of pain through her body. She wanted to scream, but she bit her lip and stayed quiet. She would not give them the satisfaction. The journey took hours. Or maybe minutes. Yuna could not tell. Pain and fear mixed together until time lost all meaning. Finally, the vehicle stopped. The door opened. Different Drask pulled her out and dragged her down a long corridor. The walls were made of smooth gray metal. Lights hung from the ceiling like glowing orbs. Everything was cold and sterile. They brought her to a small room with no windows. The walls were bare. The floor was hard. In one corner sat a metal bed with thin padding. In another corner was a hole in the ground for waste. That was all. They threw her onto the bed and left. The door sealed shut with a hiss. Yuna lay there for a long time, just breathing. In and out. In and out. She was alive. That was something. She took inventory of her injuries. Broken ribs on the left side. Possibly a fractured arm. Cuts and bruises everywhere, concussion, but nothing immediately fatal. She would survive if they let her. Days passed. Or what Yuna thought were days. Without windows, she could not see the sun. The lights in her cell never changed. Guards came periodically with food. They slid a tray through a slot in the door. The food was gray and lumpy and smelled like rotten fish. Yuna's stomach turned just looking at it. She did not eat. This was part of her training. If captured, refuse all food from the enemy. It was an act of defiance, a way to maintain control when everything else was taken away. The Drask could imprison her body, but they could not force her to accept their charity. She would starve before she gave them that power. More guards came. These ones wore different armor with symbols Yuna did not recognize. They pulled her from the cell and took her to another room. This one had bright lights and strange machines. A Drask with pale scales stood waiting. He wore no armor, only a long coat covered in tools and devices. He gestured to a chair in the center of the room. The guards forced Yuna into the chair. Metal bands locked around her wrists and ankles. The pale Drask approached. He examined her with cold, calculating eyes. He touched her broken ribs. She gasped in pain. He made notes on a device. He shined lights in her eyes. He took samples of her blood. Through it all, Yuna stared straight ahead. She would not look at him. She would not acknowledge him. When he finished, the guards returned her to her cell. Another food tray waited. Yuna kicked it across the room. The gray slop splattered against the wall. Time became her enemy. Without food, her body began to weaken. The pain from her injuries grew worse instead of better. She grew dizzy when she stood. Her thoughts became clouded and slow. But still, she did not eat. Each time they brought food, she refused it. Sometimes she threw it. Sometimes she just ignored it. But she never ate, the Drask began to notice. Guards would stop at her cell and watch through the small window in the door. They talked among themselves in their grinding language. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they looked concerned. Yuna did not care what they thought. Then one day something changed. Yuna heard small voices outside her cell. Not the deep rumbling of adult Drask, but higher pitched, younger. She pulled herself up to look through the window. 3 small Drask stood in the corridor. They were only half the size of the adults, with brighter scales and bigger eyes. Children, cubs. They stared at her with open curiosity. A guard shouted at them. The cubs ran away, their clawed feet clicking on the metal floor. But Yuna kept thinking about them, about the way they looked at her. Not with hatred or disgust, just wonder. That night, as Yuna lay weak and trembling on her bed, she heard something, a soft scratching sound. It came from the wall near the floor. She watched as a small panel pushed open. 3 small faces peeked through the opening. The cubs had found a way into her cell. Yuna's heart raced. Were they here to hurt her? To mock her? She tried to sit up but did not have the strength. The cubs crawled through the opening. The first one was slightly larger than the others, with dark blue scales. The second had green scales with golden spots. The third was the smallest, with scales that shimmered between purple and silver. They approached slowly, cautiously. Yuna held very still. The largest cub held something in its small claws. A ration pack. Food. The cub came closer and held it out to Yuna. She did not take it. She turned her head away. The cub made a soft chirping sound. It pushed the ration pack closer. Yuna looked at it. Then at the cub. The young Drask's eyes were wide and concerned. It pushed the food into Yuna's hand, closing her fingers around it. The other 2 cubs added their own ration packs to the pile. Yuna's eyes filled with tears. These children were giving her their own food. They were trying to help her, not because someone ordered them to, but because they wanted to, because they saw her suffering and it moved them. For the first time since her capture, Yuna's resolve cracked. She looked at the 3 small faces watching her with hope and worry. And slowly, with shaking hands, she opened one of the ration packs and took a small bite. The ration pack tasted like cardboard mixed with chemicals, but Yuna forced herself to swallow. The 3 cubs watched her eat with obvious satisfaction. They chirped and clicked to each other in their own language. The smallest one clapped its small claws together. Yuna finished the first pack slowly. Her stomach cramped from the sudden food after so many days without eating. But the cubs looked so happy that she could not stop. She opened the second pack and ate that too. The cubs settled down around her bed, making soft cooing sounds. The largest cub pointed at itself and made a sound that Yuna could not quite understand. It repeated the sound several times, tapping its chest. A name, the cub was telling her its name. Yuna listened carefully. It sounded like Hana. She tried to repeat it. The cub bobbed its head excitedly. Yes, that was right. The second cub with golden spots pointed at itself. Doyun. The smallest cub was Jisoo. Yuna repeated each name until she got them right. Then she pointed at herself. Yuna. The cubs tried to say it. Their mouths were not made for human sounds, but they did their best. Yuna smiled despite everything. It was her first smile since the crash. Hana pulled out a small device from a pocket in her scaled skin. She pressed it and a holographic image appeared in the air. It showed a Drask family, 2 large adults and 3 small cubs. Hana pointed at the cubs in the image, then at herself and her siblings. Her family. She pointed at the adults and made a gesture that Yuna understood meant they were not here. Doyun pulled out his own device. He showed images of the facility where they were kept. Long corridors, big rooms, many Drask soldiers walking around. He pointed at different areas and made different sounds. Yuna realized he was teaching her, showing her the layout, maybe helping her understand where she was. Jisoo, the smallest, did not have a device, but she had something else. She pulled out a small piece of cloth and offered it to Yuna. The cloth was soft and warm. Yuna took it and saw that it was a blanket, much too small for an adult Drask. It must have been Jisoo's own blanket from when she was even younger. The cub was giving her a treasure, a comfort. Yuna wrapped the small blanket around her shoulders. It barely fit, but the gesture made her chest tight with emotion. These children had every reason to fear her or hate her. The war between humans and Drask had killed so many on both sides. Yet here they were, bringing her food and comfort, showing her kindness when the adults showed only cruelty. A sound echoed down the corridor outside. Heavy footsteps. Adult Drask. The cubs froze. Hana quickly gathered the empty ration packs. Doyen pushed Yuna back onto the bed and pulled the blanket over her. Jisoo ran to the wall panel. Within seconds, all 3 cubs disappeared back through the hidden passage. The panel closed just as the footsteps reached Yuna's cell. A guard looked through the window. Yuna pretended to sleep. The guard grunted and moved on. Yuna let out a breath she did not know she was holding. The cubs had been here. It was not a dream. She still had Jisoo's small blanket. Proof that something good existed in this terrible place. The next night, the cubs returned. This time they brought more than food. Hana had medical supplies. Nothing fancy, just basic bandages and a tube of something that looked like ointment. She pointed at Yuna's injuries and then at the supplies. Yuna understood. She let Hana examine her ribs. The young Drask's claws were surprisingly gentle as she applied the ointment to Yuna's bruises. It stung at first, then grew warm. The pain began to fade. Doyen brought something different, papers and a writing tool. He drew simple pictures, a sun, a moon, stars. He pointed at each one and made sounds, teaching her words in his language. Yuna picked up the writing tool. She drew her own pictures. A different sun. Yellow, not orange. Earth's sun. She drew Earth itself, the blue and green planet she might never see again. Doyen studied her drawings with fascination. Jisoo brought music, a small device that played soft melodies. The music sounded alien to Yuna's ears, but it was beautiful. Strange harmonies and rhythms she had never heard before. Jisoo swayed to the music, moving her small body in what must have been a dance. She tried to get Yuna to join her. Yuna laughed softly. Her body hurt too much to dance, but she clapped her hands to the rhythm. Jisoo seemed delighted by this. Every night the cubs came. Every night they brought something new. Food always, but also other things. Books with pictures, toys, small treasures that meant something to them. They were sharing their world with Yuna, teaching her their language, showing her their culture, and Yuna taught them back. She taught them Korean words, simple ones at first. Hello. Thank you. Friend. The cubs learned quickly. They practiced the words with each other, giggling when they got the pronunciation wrong. Yuna taught them about Earth, about oceans and forests, about cities with millions of people, about music and art and food. The cubs listened with wide eyes, absorbing every detail. Hana was the leader. She made sure they stayed safe. She listened at the door for guards. She kept track of time so they would not stay too long. She was careful and smart, but she was also kind. She always made sure Yuna ate enough. She checked Yuna's injuries every night. She was like a little mother, caring for everyone around her. Doyun was curious about everything. He asked questions constantly, even though Yuna could not understand most of them. He brought books and images and tried to explain things about Drask society. He wanted to know everything about humans, too. Why did they have such smooth skin? Why were they so small? What did they eat on Earth? Every answer led to more questions. Jisoo was the gentlest. She seemed to sense when Yuna was in pain or sad. She would curl up next to Yuna and make soft humming sounds. She brought flowers from somewhere in the facility. Yuna did not know how Jisoo found them, but there they were. Small purple blooms that smelled sweet. Jisoo put them in a cup of water and placed them where Yuna could see them. Weeks passed this way. Yuna grew stronger. The food the cubs brought gave her energy. The medicine helped her injuries heal. More than that, the kindness gave her hope. She was not alone. Even in this prison, she had found friends. During the days Yuna endured the tests, the pale Drask scientist came regularly. He poked and prodded. He took samples. He made notes. Sometimes other Drask came to observe her. They stood behind a glass wall and watched while the scientist worked. They talked among themselves as if she were an animal in a zoo. One day, a new Drask came. This one wore armor covered in medals and symbols. A high-ranking officer, maybe a general. He stood very close to Yuna's cell and stared at her for a long time. His eyes were cold and calculating. He spoke to the guards in a commanding voice. Then he left. But Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. Something had changed. Something bad was coming. That night, when the cubs came through the wall panel, Yuna tried to warn them. She did not have the words in their language, but she made gestures. Danger. The general. They needed to be careful. Hana seemed to understand. She nodded seriously and spoke to her siblings. They all looked worried, but they did not stop coming. Every night they returned with food and comfort. Every night they risked being caught. Because that is what friends did. They helped each other even when it was dangerous. Even when it cost them something. Yuna realized that these 3 small cubs were braver than any soldier she had ever known. They did not carry weapons. They did not wear armor. But they fought against hatred and fear with the only weapons they had, compassion and kindness. And in a war that had lasted for years and killed so many, maybe those were the most powerful weapons of all. One night, Jisoo brought something special. A small carved figure made from wood. It looked like a human, though the proportions were not quite right. Jisoo must have made it herself. She placed it in Yuna's hand and chirped softly. Yuna held the small figure and felt tears roll down her face. She pulled all 3 cubs into an embrace. They hugged her back, their small arms wrapping around her as best they could. They were not human and Drask anymore. They were not enemy species fighting a war. They were just people who cared about each other. And that made all the difference in the universe. Sergeant Minho walked down the corridor with a heavy heart. His shift was almost over, but he had one more task. He had to check on the human prisoner. Command wanted daily reports on her condition. They were waiting for her to die. They had been waiting for weeks now, but somehow the human was getting stronger instead of weaker. Minho stopped at the cell door and looked through the window. The human sat on her bed, alert and awake. Her eyes were clear. Her movements were steady. This made no sense. The official report said she refused all food. Yet she was not dying. She was recovering. Something was wrong with the reports. Or something else was happening. Minho had been a soldier for 10 years. He had fought in many battles against the humans. He had seen terrible things. Done terrible things. The war had changed him from the young idealist who joined the military into something harder. Something colder. But lately he had been questioning everything. The war was supposed to be righteous. The Drask were supposed to be liberating worlds from human tyranny. But Minho had seen the occupied human colonies. He had seen the refugees. They did not look like tyrants. They looked like frightened people trying to survive. Just like the Drask civilians back home who lived in fear of human attacks. Both sides claimed the other started the war. Both sides claimed they were the victims. Both sides committed atrocities in the name of justice. Minho was tired of it all. He wanted it to end. But he was just one soldier. What could he do? He continued his rounds. He passed other cells holding supplies and equipment. He passed the recreation room where young Drask cubs played while their parents worked. He saw 3 cubs he recognized, Hana, Doyen, and Jisoo, the children of lower-ranking soldiers stationed at this facility. They were good kids, always polite, always curious, but tonight something about them seemed different. They looked nervous, excited. They whispered to each other and kept glancing down a side corridor. The corridor that led to the maintenance tunnels. Minho felt suspicion rise in his mind. He decided to follow them. The cubs did not notice him trailing behind. They were too focused on their secret mission. They slipped into a maintenance access door. Minho waited a moment, then followed. The tunnels were narrow and dark. He had to crouch to fit. He heard the cubs ahead of him, their small feet clicking on the metal floor. Minho followed the sounds through several turns. The tunnels ran throughout the entire facility. Most soldiers did not know how extensive they were. But cubs were small. They could explore places adults could not reach. Finally, Minho saw light ahead. He crept forward carefully. What he saw made him freeze in shock. The 3 cubs had opened a wall panel. On the other side was the human prisoner's cell. The cubs crawled through the opening. The human greeted them with a smile. Hana pulled out ration packs and gave them to the human. The human ate gratefully. Doyen showed her pictures on his device. Jisoo curled up next to her and hummed softly. Minho watched in stunned silence. The cubs were feeding the prisoner, visiting her, befriending her. This was treason. If discovered, the cubs would be punished severely. Their families would be disgraced. Minho should report this immediately. It was his duty, but he did not move. He watched the scene unfold before him. The human was gentle with the cubs. She touched their heads softly. She smiled at their antics. She was teaching them words in her own language. The cubs were teaching her their language in return. They were not enemies in that moment. They were just people sharing kindness. Minho felt something break inside him, or maybe something that had been broken for a long time finally healed. These children understood something that the generals and politicians did not. War could end. Peace was possible, but only if someone was brave enough to reach across the divide. He backed away quietly and returned to the main corridor. He went to his quarters and sat on his bed for a long time thinking. What should he do? If he reported the cubs, he would be following orders, doing his duty, but he would be destroying something precious, something that might be the key to ending this terrible war. On the other hand, if he stayed silent, he was committing treason himself. He was protecting enemy collaboration. If discovered, he would share the cubs' punishment. His career would end. His family would suffer. Everything he had worked for would be lost. Minho did not sleep that night. He wrestled with his decision until dawn. When morning came, he had made his choice. He would protect the cubs. He would protect the human. And he would do whatever it took to help them. The next day, Minho volunteered for additional shifts. He made sure he was assigned to patrol the corridors near the human's cell. He learned the guard rotation schedules. He noted when the fewest soldiers were on duty. He began to plan. That night, when the cubs made their visit, Minho was ready. He positioned himself where he could see both the maintenance access and the main corridor. If anyone approached, he would create a distraction, a dropped equipment crate, a triggered alarm somewhere else. Anything to keep attention away from the cubs. His vigilance paid off. Twice that night, other guards came close to discovering the cubs. Both times, Minho created diversions. A mysterious noise in the storage room, a report of suspicious activity on a different level. The guards investigated, giving the cubs time to escape unnoticed. This became Minho's new routine. Every night he stood watch. Every night he protected the secret friendship developing between the human and the three young Drask. It was exhausting. He barely slept. His performance reviews began to suffer, but he did not care. This was more important than any performance review. One night, Hana noticed him. She had sharp eyes, that one. She saw Minho standing at the end of the corridor, obviously watching for trouble. The cub stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. She understood. Minho nodded back. An alliance had been formed. After that, Hana began to coordinate with Minho. She would signal when the cubs were about to visit. Minho would confirm the corridors were clear. If danger approached, Minho would knock on a pipe 3 times. The sound would echo through the maintenance tunnels, warning the cubs to hide. The system worked well for several weeks. The human grew stronger, the cubs grew bolder, and Minho became more committed to protecting them. He began to bring extra ration packs and leave them where the cubs could find them. He disabled cameras along certain routes. He altered patrol schedules to create safe windows, but Minho knew this could not last forever. The facility's commander, General Throck, was not a fool. He would eventually notice the human's impossible recovery. He would investigate. And when he did, everyone involved would be in terrible danger. Minho's fears came true sooner than expected. One day, General Throck himself came to inspect the human prisoner. He examined her through the cell window for a long time. Then he called for her medical records. The pale scientist brought them immediately. General Throck read through the reports with growing anger. The report said the human refused all food. Yet clearly she was being fed somehow. Someone was helping her. Someone was committing treason. The general's voice echoed through the corridor as he shouted orders. Find out who was responsible. Search everything. Question everyone. Minho felt ice fill his veins. The investigation had begun. It was only a matter of time before they traced the ration pack shortages, before they reviewed the security footage and noticed the gaps, before they discovered the cubs and their secret visits. That night, Minho made a difficult decision. He waited until the cubs came to visit the human. Then he followed them through the maintenance tunnel. He opened the wall panel and crawled into the cell. 4 sets of eyes turned to him in shock. The human scrambled backward, fear written across her face. The cubs positioned themselves between Minho and the human, trying to protect their friend despite being tiny compared to him. Minho raised his hands to show he meant no harm. He spoke softly to the cubs in their language. "I am not here to hurt anyone. I am here to help." Hana studied him suspiciously. "You are a soldier. Soldiers do not help enemies." "No," Minho agreed. "But I am a soldier who is tired of war. A soldier who sees 3 brave cubs teaching an old warrior about courage." He sat down slowly, making himself less threatening. The human watched him with cautious eyes. Minho looked at her directly. "You do not understand my words yet, but you will learn. I am Minho. I am going to help you." He turned to the cubs. "General Throck is investigating. He knows someone is feeding her. Soon he will find out who. When he does, he will punish all of you. We must be more careful." Jisu's eyes filled with fear. Doyen moved closer to his sisters, but Hana stood straight and brave. "What should we do?" Minho smiled sadly. "We do what we must. We protect each other, all of us, even if it costs us everything." From that moment, Minho became part of their secret group, the adult who would help the cubs protect their friend, the soldier who chose mercy over duty, the Drask who dared to imagine peace. But General Throck was closing in, and time was running out. General Throck stood in his office high above the facility and looked at the report spread across his desk. Something was very wrong. The human prisoner should have died weeks ago. She had refused all official rations, yet medical scans showed she was recovering. Someone was feeding her. Someone in his own facility was betraying the Drask Empire. He called for his second in command. "Increase surveillance on the prisoner. I want cameras in every corridor. I want reports on every soldier who goes near her cell, and find out where our ration supplies have been going." The investigation intensified. Security footage was reviewed. Inventory was checked. Soldiers were questioned. General Throck was determined to find the traitor, and when he did, the punishment would be severe. An example would be made. Down in the lower levels, Minho knew time was running out. He gathered the cubs in a secure location and spoke urgently. "The general is searching for answers. He will find them soon. We must prepare for the worst." Hana was frightened but trying to be brave. What will happen to Yuna? Minho had learned the human's name from the cubs. It made her real. Not just an enemy prisoner, but a person with a name and a life. General Throck sees her as a tool for propaganda. When he is done studying her, he will execute her publicly, to show Drask's strength and human weakness. Doyen's scales turned pale. "We cannot let that happen." "No," Minho agreed. "We cannot. So we must help her escape." The cubs stared at him in shock. Escape from a military facility? It seemed impossible. But Minho had been thinking about this for days. He had been a soldier long enough to know the facility's weaknesses. He had access codes. He knew patrol routes. He had the authority to move around without suspicion. Maybe, just maybe, it could work. "Listen carefully," Minho said. "This is what we must do." Over the next few days, Minho prepared everything in secret. He stole supplies and hid them in the maintenance tunnels. Food, water, medical supplies, a communications device, a map showing the route to human territory. Everything Yuna would need to survive in the wilderness. He studied the guard shifts and found the optimal time, 3 in the morning, during a shift change. The corridors would be mostly empty for 15 minutes. Not much time, but enough. The cubs would guide Yuna through the maintenance tunnels to the outer wall. Minho would disable the security systems and create a breach in the perimeter fence. But there was a problem. Minho's security clearance was not high enough to disable all the systems without triggering alerts. He needed help from someone with higher access. There was only one person he trusted enough to ask. Corporal Unji worked in the security control room. She and Minho had served together for years. They had been friends once before the war made friendship difficult. Minho found her during her break and asked to speak privately. "I need your help with something," he said carefully. Unji looked at him with tired eyes. "What kind of something?" "The kind that could get us both executed." She laughed bitterly. "Minho, what have you done?" He told her everything. About the cubs. About the human. About the plan to help Yuna escape. Unji listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You are asking me to commit treason," she finally said. "I am asking you to do what is right. Those are not always the same thing." "I know, but in this case I believe they are. Yunji rubbed her face with both hands. I have family who depend on my income. If I am caught, they will suffer. I know. I would not ask if there was another way. She looked at him with something like sadness. You were always too idealistic, Minho. Even after everything we have seen. You still believe in hope? Someone has to. Yunji sighed deeply. 3 a.m, you said? Minho's heart leapt. You will help. I will help. Because you are right. Someone has to try. Someone has to be brave enough to say that this war is wrong. That killing and hatred and fear are not the answer. Even if it costs us everything. They finalized the details. Yunji would be on duty in the security control room. At exactly 3 a.m, she would disable cameras along the escape route. She would create false alerts on the opposite side of the facility to draw guards away. She would give them the 15 minutes they needed. The night of the escape arrived. Minho had barely slept for days. His nerves were wound tight. Everything had to work perfectly. One mistake and they would all be caught. But he had to try. For the cubs who had shown such courage. For the human who had suffered enough. For himself and the belief that peace was possible. Minho went to Yuna's cell shortly before 3. He used his security codes to open the door. Yuna looked up in surprise. She had been waiting. Dressed in stolen clothes the cubs had brought her. She was still weak from her injuries and the weeks of imprisonment, but her eyes were determined. Tonight, Minho said in simple Korean words he had learned. Tonight you go free. Yuna stood on shaking legs. The cubs. They wait in the tunnel. Come. He led her to the maintenance access. The cubs were already there, bouncing nervously. When they saw Yuna, they rushed to embrace her. Yuna hugged them back, tears streaming down her face. She knew this might be the last time she saw them. We must move, Minho urged. Time is short. They crawled through the maintenance tunnels. Minho led the way with a portable light. The cubs stayed close to Yuna, helping her when she stumbled. The tunnels twisted and turned, but Minho knew the path. He had mapped every step. They emerged in a storage room near the facility's outer wall. Minho checked his communicator. 3 minutes past 3. They were on schedule. He led them through the storage room and out into the night. The alien sky stretched above them, purple and filled with unfamiliar stars. Minho guided them along the perimeter wall to a section hidden from guard towers. He had placed the supplies here earlier, a backpack filled with everything Yuna needed. He helped her put it on, adjusting the straps. The fence opens there, he pointed. Run north for 5 kilometers. You will find a forest. Hide there until dawn. Then go east. The map shows human territory. 3 days walking if you do not stop. Yuna looked at the fence, then back at the cubs. She knelt down and pulled all 3 into a fierce embrace. She whispered words in Korean. Thank you. I love you. I will never forget. The cubs clung to her, crying softly. You must go, Minho said gently. Soon guards will notice. Yuna stood. She looked at Minho with gratitude in her eyes. She bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect. Minho bowed back. Then he activated his security override. A section of the fence powered down and slid open. Yuna took one last look at her friends. Then she ran. She disappeared into the darkness beyond the fence. Minho watched her go, hoping she would make it. Hoping this sacrifice meant something. He closed the fence and led the cubs back through the maintenance tunnels. His heart pounded. They had done it. Against all odds, they had freed her. Now came the dangerous part, covering their tracks, pretending nothing had happened. They returned to the storage room. Minho was about to lead them back toward the cell when alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed throughout the facility. Minho's blood turned cold. They had been discovered too soon. His communicator crackled. Yunji's voice came through, panicked. Minho, abort. General Throck is in the security room. He saw everything. He knows the prisoner escaped. He knows about the cubs. Guards are coming, run. But there was nowhere to run. Heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. Soldiers appeared, weapons drawn. They surrounded Minho and the cubs. General Throck walked slowly through the soldiers. His expression was cold fury. Sergeant Minho, the general said softly, you have betrayed your oath. You have betrayed your people. You have committed treason against the Empire. Minho pushed the cubs behind him. I did what was right. You freed an enemy combatant. I freed a person who did not deserve to die in a cell. General Throck's claws flexed. And these cubs? Did they help you? No, Minho lied immediately. They knew nothing. I used them, manipulated them. They are innocent. Hana tried to step forward. That is not... Minho grabbed her shoulder, squeezing hard enough to make her stop. He looked into her eyes, pleading silently. Let me take the blame. Save yourselves. Hana understood. She fell silent. General Throck studied them all. Take them to detention. All of them. We will sort out the truth during interrogation. Guards grabbed Minho roughly. Other guards took the cubs much more gently. They were marched through the facility in shame. Other soldiers watched with shock and disgust. A traitor in their midst, cubs who had befriended the enemy. They were locked in separate cells. Minho sat alone in the darkness and wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The cubs would be punished because of him. Yunji would be caught and punished. And Yuna might not even survive the wilderness. But then he remembered the look in Yuna's eyes. The hope, the gratitude, and he remembered the cubs' courage. Their compassion, their refusal to accept hatred just because they were told to. If this was the price for standing against the war, he would pay it gladly. Outside the facility, somewhere in the darkness, Yuna ran toward freedom. She carried with her the hope that peace was possible, the knowledge that good people existed on both sides of the war, and a promise to herself that she would tell everyone what 3 small cubs and 1 brave soldier had done. The war would not end tonight. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. Yuna ran through the alien forest until her lungs burned and her legs trembled. She did not stop. She could not stop. Behind her was captivity. Ahead was the slim chance of survival. She pushed through strange vegetation that glowed softly in the darkness. She stumbled over roots and rocks. She fell twice but forced herself back up. As dawn broke with orange light filtering through the purple canopy, Yuna finally stopped. She found a small cave formed by fallen rocks and crawled inside. Her whole body shook from exhaustion and pain. She opened the backpack Minho had given her and found water. She drank gratefully. Inside the pack was everything she needed. Food rations, medical supplies, a thermal blanket, the communications device, and the map showing the way to human territory. 3 days of walking, Minho had said, but Yuna was injured and weak. It would take her longer. She activated the communications device. It would send a signal to any human ships in range. But the signal might also alert the Drask to her location. She had to be careful. She set it to pulse mode, sending short bursts at irregular intervals, less likely to be tracked that way. For 2 days, Yuna moved through the wilderness. She traveled at night when it was safer. She hid during the day. The planet's wildlife mostly ignored her. Strange creatures that looked like combinations of Earth animals. She avoided them when possible. On the 3rd night, as she climbed a hill to get better signal range, she heard something. Aircraft engines. She dove into bushes and watched as Drask search vehicles flew overhead with spotlights. They were still looking for her. She waited until they passed, then continued moving. By the 4th day, Yuna's supplies were running low. Her water was almost gone. She found a stream and refilled her containers, hoping the water was safe to drink. She had no choice. She drank and continued walking. On the 5th day, she heard different engines. These sounded higher-pitched. Human engines. She pulled out the communications device and switched it to emergency beacon mode, maximum signal. The risk of detection no longer mattered. She needed rescue now or she would die out here. The ship appeared an hour later, a human scout vessel. It landed in a clearing near Yuna's position. Marines poured out, weapons ready. Yuna stumbled toward them, hands raised. She was crying and laughing at the same time. I am Lieutenant Yuna, Terran Defense Force, she called out. I am the pilot who was shot down 5 weeks ago. The Marines rushed forward to help her. They wrapped her in blankets and gave her water. The medic examined her injuries. They loaded her onto the ship and took off immediately. Drask's search vehicles were closing in on the signal. Back on the human base, Yuna spent days in the medical bay. Her injuries were worse than she thought. Broken bones that had healed incorrectly, infections, malnutrition. But she was alive. And she was home. When she was strong enough to talk, the debriefing officers came. They wanted to know everything. What had she seen? What intelligence could she provide about Drask military capabilities? How had she survived so long without food? Yuna told them the truth. All of it about refusing to eat. About the 3 cubs who brought her food. About Sergeant Minho who protected them. About the escape. about the courage and kindness she found in the most unexpected place. The officers were skeptical. Enemy soldiers helping a prisoner escape. Cubs befriending a human. Sounded like propaganda or delusion. But Yuna insisted. She showed them Jisu's carved figure that she had kept in her pocket through everything. She showed them the small blanket. Physical proof of her story. We must do something, Yuna urged. Those cubs and Sergeant Minho are being punished for helping me. Maybe worse. We cannot abandon them. The officers promised to consider it, but Yuna knew how military bureaucracy worked. Consider meant delay. Delay meant never. She needed to try a different approach. Yuna contacted the media. She told her story to reporters. About the cubs. About Minho. About how enemies became friends. The story spread across human space like wildfire. Everyone wanted to hear about the brave Drask who chose mercy over loyalty. Public opinion began to shift. For years, the war had been seen as necessary. Humans versus Drask, good versus evil. But Yuna's story complicated that narrative. If Drask cubs could show compassion, if Drask soldiers could choose peace, maybe the enemy was not so different after all. Meanwhile, in the Drask facility, Minho and the cubs faced trial. General Throck wanted them executed as an example. But something unexpected happened. Their story had spread through the Drask military too. Soldiers talked, families heard, and many felt uncomfortable. 3 small cubs risked everything to help someone in need. A sergeant protected children and chose mercy. Were these the actions of traitors? Or were they the actions of good people trapped in a bad situation? Protests began on the Drask homeworld. Not large protests, not organized, but families gathered outside government buildings. They carried signs with simple messages. Mercy is not treason. Protect the cubs. Peace is possible. The Drask government was embarrassed. The cubs' trial was becoming an international incident. Human diplomats used it as leverage in negotiations. Release the cubs and Sergeant Minho and we will discuss prisoner exchanges. For both sides, the war was becoming increasingly unpopular. Years of fighting with no clear victory. Resources depleted. Families broken. Everyone was tired. The cubs' story gave them something to hope for. A reason to try peace instead of more violence. Negotiations intensified. Both governments were pressured by their own people. Finally, after weeks of discussions, an agreement was reached. A prisoner exchange. Minho and the cubs would be released to neutral territory. In return, several high-ranking Drask prisoners held by humans would be freed. The exchange took place on a neutral space station. Yuna was there, representing the human side. She had insisted on it. She needed to see them again. To know they were safe. When the Drask transport arrived, Yuna's heart raced. The airlock opened. Minho emerged first, escorted by guards. He looked thinner, tired, but alive. Behind him came the cubs. They looked frightened and small in the large corridor. Then Jisu saw Yuna. The small cub made a sound of joy and broke free from the guards. She ran toward Yuna as fast as her small legs could carry her. Hana and Doyen followed immediately. The guards tried to stop them, but Minho held up a hand. Yuna knelt down and caught all 3 cubs in her arms. They crashed into her, nearly knocking her over. They cried and chirped and held her tight. Yuna cried too. She had not been sure she would ever see them again. Minho approached slowly. Yuna stood and bowed deeply to him. Minho bowed back. They could not speak each other's languages well, but words were not needed. They both understood sacrifice. They both understood courage. The prisoner exchange was completed. But something more happened that day. The humans in Drask who witnessed it saw something powerful. They saw enemies embracing. They saw tears of joy instead of hatred. They saw what peace could look like. That image was captured by journalists from both sides. It appeared on news broadcasts across the galaxy. A human woman hugging 3 Drask cubs, a Drask sergeant shaking hands with human officers. The picture spoke louder than any words. Public pressure for peace intensified. Politicians on both sides realized that continuing the war was no longer popular. Negotiations expanded beyond prisoner exchanges to actual peace talks. It took months. There were setbacks and arguments, but slowly progress was made. A ceasefire was declared. Then came formal peace accords. The war that had lasted for years finally ended, not with a glorious victory for either side, but with recognition that killing each other solved nothing. Yuna and the cubs became symbols of the peace. They were invited to speak at the signing ceremony. Standing together on a stage with leaders from both civilizations, they showed what was possible when people chose compassion over hate. I refused to eat because I was taught that accepting enemy charity was weakness, Yuna told the assembled crowd. But 3 small cubs taught me that accepting kindness is the greatest strength. They refused to see me as an enemy. They saw me as someone who needed help, and they helped, even though it was dangerous, even though they could be punished. Hana spoke next through a translator. We did not understand war. We only understood that someone was hurt and hungry. Helping her was not treason. It was what anyone should do. Minho stepped forward. I was a soldier for 10 years. I followed orders. I fought because I was told to fight. But these cubs showed me that there is a higher duty than following orders. The duty to do what is right even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. The ceremony concluded with the signing of the peace treaty. Yuna and the cubs stood together as witnesses. They held hands, Human and Drask, while leaders from both civilizations promised to end the violence and build a better future. But the story did not end there. Peace was just the beginning. Now came the hard work of rebuilding trust and cooperation. Yuna proposed creating a new organization, the Interspecies Cultural Exchange Center, a place where humans and Drask could learn about each other, where prejudice could be replaced with understanding. Minho joined her in this work. So did the cubs when they were old enough. They dedicated their lives to making sure that what happened to them could happen for others, that enemies could become friends. That war was not inevitable,